Today we're going to talk about shamanic journeying. I like to say I have 10,000 arrows in my quiver, and this is just one of those ways that you can try out this arrow. And if it plays for you, great, and it feeds you, perfect. If it doesn't, I'm not attached to any outcome that you may or may not have with journeying. I have found it to be very, very helpful to a lot of people, and therefore I suggest you give it a try. Conceptually, obviously the whole point of moving on this path is to get over that bridge, in my way, between being culturally controlled in your left brain and having your ego run your life versus learning how to live a life that's in the flow and live a life based on faith, based on your heart rather than your head. The most difficult journey in the world, much more difficult than shamanic journeying, is to make this 13-inch trip from right here to right here. That's the longest 13 inches you're ever going to travel in your life, but I feel this is one way where you can get over that bridge. Shamanic journeying is the oldest form of medicine known to man, probably 20,000 years old. In the classic sense, journeying was about the shaman, the witch, the medicine woman in the tribe entering into an altered state and taking a journey through the client's body, usually lying next to the client, touching shoulder, elbow, and ankle, and going into altered state, taking a journey through the client's body, returning to the middle world, conscious world, and then treating the client according to what they learned on the journey. What our culture tends to do is place a lot of glamour on what shamans and witch doctors and so forth can do, and my point of view is, from my own learnings now, we all have all of those talents that are totally natural to us, other than they get taken away from us during our childhood and our, what I call our adulteration. So when you're a 1-year-old sitting in the sandbox, I feel like you are naturally doing everything that we're going to kind of try and talk about going back to now as a way for you to build that bridge between living a life that maybe our culture and your karma has dictated to you, and learn how to live one that's in the flow and in the faith of your connection to the spiritual world, whatever that may be, wherever that may come from. So the 1-year-old in the sandbox is often accused of having a very short attention span. And I feel the reason for this is because the child at that age is totally open, has not been closed down at all, and so maybe the child is listening to 15 different forms of consciousness that are going on in their sphere of seeing, and I don't mean seeing in the sense of visually, but they're actually listening to all of these different conversations that are going on in the natural world around them. And of course, parents get mad at children for having a short attention span, but probably my imagination would say that the conversation that my parents are trying to have with me is probably the most boring conversation out of the 15 other ones that I can tune into. So this whole idea, in a way, is about when you're 1 or 2 or whenever it is, your adults decide that you're too scary for them, that they need to enculturate you. 1, they need to build fears into you because they have fears about our culture, and they feel like they need to protect you. 2, they want you to behave and perform about the way that they think that you'll be most loved by our culture. So there's the conditional training about if you dress like this, and if you practice the religion we practice, and if you get good grades in school, and so forth and so on. These are all the conditions that are unintentionally maybe placed on love, but love ends up being a very conditional, and the way I look at it, what happens is that when you get pulled out of that sandbox and you get started out with adulteration, and then eventually you're in kindergarten, so now you're in school, and so now you start getting encultured as well as adultered. And the combination of the two is that they close down your ability to listen to all these other conversations, because, you know, Aunt Boo says, you know, Marshall, if you keep daydreaming like that, you're going to end up being nothing. And so there's this very subtle forming where they close us down, and they want us to have tunnel vision. They basically want us to see what they want us to see. And in fact, the end of that whole process, I use the term your 8-year-old, because psychology says all of the screens and the filters and the programs by which you're going to interpret the rest of your life are cast in stone by the time you're 8 years old. So I just use the term your 8-year-old's driving your car unless you're conscious that you're doing that. So the essence of life is that we see what our filters and screens tell us to see, what's okay to see, and we hear what we want to hear, and what our again, those same filters tell us we can hear. So conceptually, the idea of journeying is to be able to, at your own option and with your own free will, open up the window that's been built to stop you from having access to this conversation, to open up that window and step through the window and put your feet in the water of what egoistically our culture calls altered state, which I don't think is an altered state at all. I think it's a very natural state. It's just one that you have been taught not to use anymore. But you can step into those waters and you can experience that flow, and then you can come back through the window and you can close the window down again, and you can be safe again back in your culture again. That can be just as powerful as having the experience that I had when I woke up, and from my near-death experience, all the walls were gone. So I just woke up with all of those avenues of communication open again. Of course, I didn't have any model for it, so I didn't even know the word shaman then, or that there was any model that could explain what was happening to me. So that's really crazy making in a hurry to wake up that way. This way can be much more gentle, much more in the flow of doing it the way you want to do it. So in talking about this natural, ancient way of looking at aspects of your life, journeying to me is about having a conversation with your higher self, or reintegrating yourself with your higher self so that you can ask the question. Journeying from its very inception is always about asking a question or finding out the answer to a question, whether it's journeying through somebody else's body to find out what's wrong with them, or taking the journey for yourself to ask a question. So there's an intention to move towards something aspect with the journey. And the journey represents, to me, the most powerful thing in that is purely self-divination. When you take the journey to your higher self or your power animals or whatever that may be, there is nobody else's energy getting involved in what the conversation is or what the answers is or what you might or might not want to be doing in your life. Whereas if somebody's doing guided meditation with you, or doing psychology, or doing therapy of any other kind, then that other person's energy and that other person's judgment and their ways of steering you are all involved in this process. This process does not involve any of those other aspects. So I think in a way it is truly the way, to have some self-divination, to have that conversation with your true self, if that's a way to say it. So let's talk about the concept of discipline and discipleship when it comes to journeying. I always try and teach people that what you should feel when you're journeying is discipleship. And although the root word disciple and discipline are exactly the same words, I think when you say those two words to yourself, probably feel differently, have different energies. Discipline seems like having to do something. I have to discipline myself to not eat this or to do this exercise or whatever else. Discipleship, on the other hand, is something that you actively choose to do for yourself because it feels good and because it feeds you. So I ask you to kind of maybe get yourself into a set where you consider journeying to be a discipleship, that it's a gift to yourself to take the time, to set aside time to do this. In the big scheme of things, if you think about opening the window and stepping through the window, and you decide that you're going to do that every day or 3 times a week or whatever may be okay for you, I think in time you will end up opening and closing this window so frequently that eventually the wall with that window in it will disappear. And in essence, you will be having that conversation 24 hours a day, just like I have since 1982. In other words, if you use this discipleship long enough and you become comfortable enough with this form of information coming to you all the time, you won't really have the requirement to go through the specific ritual of the journey, which I'm trying to teach to you now, because that's the place to start. But eventually it may evolve until you don't really have any need to do that anymore, because you know that that part of you is always open and always in communication. So let's talk about the topography of the shamanic world, if we want to call it that. In the shamanic world, consciousness, or where you and I are at right now, is called middle world. And then there are 2 other worlds within the shamanic topography, upper world and lower world. The only difference between any of these worlds is that in the actual journey, in your decision at the beginning of the journey whether to go up to get into altered state or to go down into altered state, is the determination that you are going to lower world or to upper world. There are no geographic boundaries to upper world or lower world. So in essence, you could choose to take a journey to lower world and go down to get into altered state. And when you break through the veil into the altered state, you could be sitting on Pluto, looking at the moon from way above and be totally in this starry place. You still, in the sense of the shamanic journey, are in lower world because you chose to go down first. Or vice versa, you could choose to go up and you could come through the veil and end up in the middle of the earth. You would still be in upper world. So again, no geographic boundaries to upper world or lower world. They can be any place. It's just a matter of a choice that you will make and learn to make about where you will receive the kind of information that you're looking for. For a particular question, you may choose to go to lower world, or you may choose to go to upper world. Or some people find out that there's a part of them that knows which is the best place to go, and so at the beginning of the journey they just jump, and sometimes they go up and sometimes they go down, and they just let that be the way it is, knowing that that's going to work out for them. Lower world is the first place that, in tradition, that people go to experience the journey. Lower world tends to be primordial, very old. In a sense, you could look at the human body And if you look at the top of the brain stem, you have an old brain, and then you have a modern brain sitting on top of that. The old brain takes care of all the autonomic things that go on, your breathing and all that kind of stuff. So old world is, for most people, or lower world for most people, is pre-verbal. It's before language. It's before there was a modern thought form, so to speak, or a language form. So in most cases, lower world is primordial. It is a natural world with no modern structures or anything like that. It's a world inhabited by animals, not so much humanoid type people. It's a world of a much more simpler world maybe than the confusing world that we live in today of technology and words and all of that stuff. So again, no descriptors, no geography boundaries to either upper world or lower world. And trust me, everything I'm telling you is a generality, because everybody has a little bit different experience with journeying, and I don't want to put any boundaries on what your experience is going to be. And please don't put any boundaries on, ever get into this thing about saying I'm doing this right or I'm doing it wrong or I'm not doing it the way Marshall told me to do it or whatever. Wherever the flow takes you, try and get into that place where you just say, hey, this is where I'm going, this is where I need to be. Don't get stuck in this, I'm doing it right or I'm doing it wrong. I think maybe the only thing that you can do in that area at all is just have the discipleship to go there and to have that experience. You won't always have great journeys. You won't always have great experiences. But you'll never have any experience unless you just give yourself that gift to go once in a while and see what's going to happen. So that's my suggestion there. So let's talk about the concept of drumming and this altered state. Drumming is the one thing that formed the umbrella for the whole term shamanism. Was that in the 13th and 1400s, when anthropologists started running around the world finally and comparing notes with each other, they found out that almost all medicine doctors, witches, shamans, all listened to the drum, and they all listened to the drum at exactly the same rate. They knew these people weren't swapping faxes and emails with each other, so there was a really big kind of what's going on here, that all of these different types of people involved in this medicine world as they knew it in the olden times listened to the drum at this rate. And it wasn't until the 1950s, when they were doing alpha brainwave studies, that somebody said, hey, let's find out what's going on with the brain when you listen to the drum at this beat rate. And they found out that you have a very natural endorphin release if you listen to drums at that rate. So whether it took them 100 years or it took them 20 years, the shaman or the medicine person in a tribe learned by accident that if they listened to the drum at this certain rate, it was easier for them to get into the altered state, because it creates a mild opiate in your brain and it makes it easier for you to transverse into this, what egoistically everybody is selling in shamanism as an altered state. I don't believe it's an altered state. I believe it's a totally natural state. If you want to look at the state of the mind that you're in, I think that state is that state pretty much exists in your right brain rather than your left brain. It's not in the word thinking side of your brain, but in the artistic side of your brain. And I think it's a very, very much a part of your brain that is connected to the spiritual aspect of your life, wherever you want to see that fitting, whether you want to see that spirit is within inside of you or spirit is outside of you doesn't make any difference to me. It's just that I feel that part of where you go and where this conversation takes place is the part of you that's really connected to the spiritual aspect of you. So the idea of the drumming is that it creates this endorphin release for you. and it makes it easier for you to get into an altered state. Drumming is, I like to describe it as the water where shamanic journeying takes place. And I will tell you that in the beginning you're going to hear the drums, but very shortly you're probably only going to hear the drums at the very beginning of the journey, and you'll hear them again at the callback, and you probably won't have any experience, conscious experience of the drums playing in your ears during the journey in the middle. So in the beginning, the idea of journeying, of our learning how to journey, is really, one, to learn how to swim, because this is a new medium, and I'm going to pretty much guarantee you that there's going to be some conflict between your left brain and your wanting to go on this journey, because this is going to be information that's not going to come through your filters of your left brain. So and your left brain, for most people, is very controlling. It wants to be in control. So the conceptual idea here is that there's probably going to be a little bit of a turf war going on about who's controlling what, and that your left brain may or may not be very comfortable with you getting information from another source, any source for that matter. So the idea of, in the beginning of journeying, is really twofold. One, to experience it and learn how to carry a question into altered state. But two is to learn how to just be comfortable in the water of journeying. And the water of journeying is these drums, is listening to drums. So in the beginning, it would be very difficult for you to learn how to swim if I put a 50-pound weight in a backpack on your back. Very hard. So in the beginning, we're not going to do emotional things. We're not going to take highly charged emotional questions on journeys, because that's just like putting this 50-pound weight on your back when you're trying to learn how to swim. So in the beginning, for the first 5 or 6 journeys, or however long it takes, we're going to keep things light as far as the emotional side of it, and just try and have fun with it and learn what the experience of journeying is like. Once you get the topography down and you're comfortable with the experience and you know what's starting to happen, then I think there's going to be some space in your own control mechanisms to allow you to start taking tougher emotional questions that are really probably part of what's underlying your wanting to take off on this aspect anyway. So let's talk about just this learning how to swim techniques, and one of those is that during the journey, I feel there's probably going to be times when your left brain is going to break into your experience of the journey, and I call this interruption internal dialogue. So a mild form of internal dialogue was that you would be in the middle of the journey and next Tuesday's dental appointment might come floating into your mind. So that, again, is just your left brain, to me, trying to interrupt the flow of this thing. And I would strongly suggest always that when you have internal dialogue, do not try and deny that this internal dialogue is going on. I think you're much better to just change your focus for a second to the internal dialogue. Say, thank you very much, left brain, for reminding me about next Tuesday's dental appointment. Now I'm going back to my journey. And I think when you do that, when you just acknowledge that it's there and then just say you're going back, you'll drop right back into your journey where you got pulled out of it by the internal dialogue. A more acerbic form of the internal dialogue would be, you know, you're just making this all up. This is just pie in the sky. This is just a whole bunch of hooey-fluey, and this is the most ridiculous thing you've ever done in your life. Now, again, I think when that internal dialogue comes in, you need to just look at the internal dialogue and say, I hear you, you know, we're just going to try it. I'm not making a judgment about this right now, and I don't think you need to either. We're just trying this out to have fun for 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 times. And then after we've tried it out for a while, then we'll figure out whether this is really a bunch of hooey-fooey or whether it really does feed me. But I'm going back to my journey. Thank you very much. So that's those are the kinds of things that might happen. One of the dichotomies that you might get into yourself, kind of the koan to me of journeying is, well, where is this information coming from? And I would just say to you, the answer is, I think if you stay with it enough, is you'll find out it doesn't make any difference where the information is coming from. Because I think you'll find out that the information is very valid for you. Maybe not for anybody else in the universe, but it's very valid for you. So conceptually, the idea is, if you believe in Jesus or Buddha or Gandhi or John Smith or any of those people, if you believe those people existed, then I think you have to kind of open up to the concept that you very well could be one of those people, that you could be within yourself that source of information. If you need to look at it as coming from an external source, that's fine. It doesn't make any difference. But I think you have to just kind of open up to the idea when you get this accusation about you're making this whole thing up, where's this coming from, that maybe in your opening this window and going through into this other form of consciousness, you are connected to the One. And you actually do know everything you'll ever need to know in life. And you actually do have all of the power that you're ever going to need to have in life. You come with all the goods at birth. You're whole at birth. This whole idea of getting adulterated and then getting enculturated, I believe your soul chose, I believe my soul chose my parents. That was, in essence, my karma. This is what my soul chose that it wanted me to chew on. This is the deck of cards I want you to play in this lifetime. I honestly believe that your soul or your God or your spirit is not in judgment about whether you play that deck of cards well this time or you don't play at all, or if you totally deny the deck of cards is even there. There's an endless amount of time because time doesn't really exist except for in this structure that we use to make appointments with each other. So if my soul chose my parents, and then my parents and my ministers and my school teachers dealt me this deck of cards, how I play the cards now is up to me. How I play the cards in great part for me is about finally opening up to, there's another way to do this besides having this 8-year-old of mine, the one that was enculturated, drive my car all the time. Okay? I have a lot of people who come and say, Marshall, you have to stop me from doing this. I have just done the same relationship 3 times in a row the last 5 years, and they've all ended up exactly the same way. Why do I keep doing this to myself? And my way of visualizing is that person's 8-year-old is driving their car, and their so-called adult, the one they think's the adult sitting in the back seat, doesn't have a clue what's going on, to how everything's getting censored and changed into whatever when it comes in through their hearing or it comes in through their eyes and goes through all the left brain filters. So again, try and just give yourself a little bit of freedom to experience that. I think in the end you'll find out that this information that you get, that the answers to your questions are very valid in your life. At least that's worth trying this arrow out for. If you find that not true, that's cool also. One of the really important things about journeying is that you create a safe environment to journey in. You are intentionally going to ask a question, but you're also intentionally going in an altered state. And I will just tell you that if you get yanked out of this altered state in the middle, it probably won't feel very good to you psychically. It's very similar, I would say, to, you know, when you're taught that if you catch a child sleepwalking, that you just want to guide the child back to bed and get them back into bed, but you don't want to wake them up out of their sleepwalking because it's very psychically disorienting. And the same can be very true of journeying. So what I mean by setting up a safe environment is doing it in a place where you won't be interrupted, and that means disconnecting the phones. If there are other people in the house, making sure everybody knows that you're not to be interrupted while you're journeying, so forth and so on. Create a safe environment for your place. Another part of the safe environment is a comfortable environment. I would suggest that you lay down in a comfortable place. I will tell you that your metabolism is going to go down substantially when you're journeying, and so I'd always suggest, even though you may be comfortable when you first lay down, to put a blanket over you when you start to journey, because your metabolism is going to go down quite a bit, and you can actually physically get cold during the journey. So that's kind of the environment you need to set up, a safe environment. And now I want to just talk a little bit about the accoutrements, the equipment you need to take the journey. So one, I would suggest that you have either a blindfold, which I call a mindfold, or a bandana or something, whatever, that you can put across your eyes to just make it darker. And I think for most people it helps to have the room darker if you can do that, if it's easily done. You need a set of headphones so that you can listen to the drums through the headphones, and obviously you need a tape player that can play the drumming tape. You also need a tape recorder which can record the message that you're speaking out during your journey. So I'm going to get to that in just a second, but you need a tape player that's playing the drumming tape into the headphones. You need another player which is going to record your message while you're doing this journey. There's really two reasons why I have learned to teach people to journey this way. One, in a typical journey, when you get back from a journey, I think you may remember 50% of what happened. You may remember 70%. You may remember 20%. I believe that when you get back from a journey, what you remember is what you're psychically ready to handle right now. In the now, this is enough food to put on your plate. The beauty of speaking out your journey while you're having this journey, and again, this is part of learning how to swim. If you learn how to swim, speaking out your journeys, just like the drums, you're not going to hear them after very few journeys. You will learn to just speak out when you're journeying, and you won't even think about speaking out, because just talking out your experiences will become just as natural as any other part of the swimming, and you won't even think about it. The beauty is that whether it's a week later and you've eaten the food that's on your psychic plate, so to speak, and the little voice in you says, okay, I'm ready to listen to the rest of the tape, when you play the tape back, 100% of what was given to you in that journey is going to come back to you. When you hear your voice describing it, if you close your eyes, the whole thing is going to play back for you just like a videotape. So that's a very, very powerful aspect of being able to go back and bring up 100% of what your experience was on the journey. The other thing that's very, I think, valid, and what I have found, is that the left brain, the controlling brain, the one that likes to really get in there and mess things up sometimes with internal dialogue, is also the place where you form words. It's where your word box, your speaking box is. So what I have found is that if you're talking out your journey, you're actually giving your left brain something to do the whole time when you're actually having this more or less right-brained experience, right-brain and spiritual connection experience. So if your left brain has something to do, it's a lot less likely to get involved in internal dialogue. because it's busy doing something and it's not really listening so much and trying to be controlling. So 2 aspects for speaking out your journey when you're having it. Who's the voice that's speaking out the journey? It's hopefully a third-person voice. It's kind of the omniscient observer. It's a voice that's calm. It's a voice that doesn't, even though the journey is very emotional and things are happening in the journey that are very emotional, the voice doesn't have to be emotional. It can just speak out what's happening. One of the really important aspects of the voice is to not let the voice end up controlling the journey. So in essence, sometimes in journeys, things can be happening very fast and lots of things going on very rapidly, and you can't possibly speak them all out the way they're happening. You need to let the journey keep happening at the pace it's happening and just shorthand the third-person voice. Well, all heck's breaking loose here and whatever and whatever. When you go back and listen to the tape, the whole thing's going to come back to you anyway, so you don't really... What some people have a tendency to do is they stop the journey until they can speak out everything that's happened in the journey, and then they try and start the journey again. So that habitually ends up, the voice ends up controlling the journey, and it needs to be the other way around. The other thing I would suggest is that if during the journey you're in a place where nothing's happening, I think again it's very helpful to just keep talking, to just get into this habit of speaking. So if you're going to the lower world and you end up in a totally black place, you can say, gee, I'm in this black place, and you know it's still black, and there's nothing going on here, and I think I need to really get out of here, but it's still black. So you can just keep talking through this experience. Again, if you stop, then you give that left brain a chance to start jumping in with internal dialogue. So let's talk about the first journey. The first journey is, like I mentioned before, always to lower world. And the idea of the first journey is 1, to learn how to swim, 2, to carry a question to lower world, and 3, in this first journey to the lower world, very important aspects to meet your power animals. Now, everybody has power animals. They've been hanging around with you forever. I believe both of my power animals I have, before I was a being who started being human, I was a being of these particular power animals, and then I'd had experiences with those animals before. But whatever, they're very powerful friends to have, and they tend to hang out in lower world. That's where you're going to meet them. Power animals generally do not speak. They will not answer questions other than power animals usually can do yes and no. They do that okay. So in the beginning, for the first journey, I'm going to ask that you take a yes and no question. If you ask a power animal an open-ended question, remember the power animal comes from the aspect of you that's pre-verbal, that's old brain. So if you ask them an open-ended question, a power animal is probably going to put you on their back and take you somewhere and give you an experience, which will be an answer to your question. I'm going to tell you that a lot of times trying to get any grist out of that experience will be difficult, because it's like interpreting a dream. Because we're not really good in our high-end brains at understanding the archetypical kinds of information that we get from our old brain. So in general, I suggest that people don't ask open-ended questions to their power animals, but you can play around with that. Later on, when you go to a higher world, you're going to meet your teacher. Your teacher will probably be humanoid, and your teacher will be able to have conversations with you in words, and so you can have much more of an understanding kind of thing that way. So the idea of going to lower world is that you start every journey in middle world. And the first thing you're going to do, of course, is listening to the drums. You can listen to the drums ahead of time and decide how loud you want the drums to be, what's comfortable in your ears. They don't have to be real loud. They don't have to be real soft. Wherever it feels comfortable with you, just play with it. You're going to do that a couple times. You're going to know where you like it, and you don't have to play around with that anymore. So when you first lay down for your journey and you're listening to the drums, you repeat your question 3 times. Let's talk about the questions in the beginning when you're learning how to journey. Don't make them emotional questions. Your first journey to lower world, make it just something that's going on in your life right now. Should I buy those new tires that I saw on sale for the car now? Very good question. Can be answered yes or no. Should I take the trip to see Aunt so-and-so that I'm thinking about taking? Whatever. Something simple, unemotional, yes and no answer. So at the start of the journey, you listen to the drums a little bit, you repeat your question 3 times. Out loud, you're speaking out into a tape recorder, you're recording this message. And then what you need to do in your preparation for lower journey is decide where you can imagine that you will have access to go from middle world to lower world. So for instance, maybe a common thing would be that you have a tree in your backyard, or you had a tree in your backyard when you were a child, and you remember that it had a big knothole in it, so maybe you can imagine that you could go in the knothole in that tree and go down through the roots and get into lower world by going through the roots. There's all kinds of ways to get to lower world. I've been living in the water my whole life. I like to scuba dive. I personally go down in the water and go into a cave that I have experienced a number of times, one of my favorite places to go diving. Whatever it may be. I had a lady who lived in St. Paul who would go up, she lived on the 8th floor, something like that, and she would press open the elevator doors on the 8th floor and step in, and there was no elevator, and she would just fly down the elevator shaft. Now, being an ex-architect, all I can see is springs and concrete down there, and it doesn't work very well for me. But she got the lower world just fine. That was her way of doing it. Whatever works for you, whatever plays. Don't. Again, all the things I'm saying are generalities. This is going to be a unique experience in your own way of looking at this world. So don't get into this thing, I'm doing it right or I'm doing it wrong. Do whatever plays and whatever works for you. So let's say, for instance, that let's just use the tree in the knothole. So after you repeated your question 3 times, you just say, okay, I'm walking across the backyard, I'm going to my tree. The tree in the middle world, your access to lower world or to upper world, that needs to be a real place, not an imagined place. It needs to be an actual tree that you experienced in your life, or an actual elevator shaft, or an actual cave, whatever. But it needs to be anchored in reality, because this is the place that you're going to come back to from whence you went to this altered state. You're going to come back to this place. It needs to be in middle world. So I'm walking up to the tree, and I'm climbing in the knothole, and I'm going down through the roots, and you're just going to talk out your experience. I don't want to put boundaries on your experience. It could be almost anything. Fairly typical in most journeys is that at a point in a journey, you will run into the veil, and the veil to upper world tends to be more like, like a cloud or some kind of layer of ether. And in lower world, for a lot of people, it tends to be maybe a restriction that you may have to shapeshift. You may have to change the size of your body or whatever to get through a certain place. Or there might be a place where it just becomes difficult. I tend to call this as a will check. This is like a part of you saying, are you sure you really want to go here? And you, journeying is in great part directly proportional to your intention. And there may be many, many times, I don't care how long you journey, there may be many, many times when you're asked that question, How strong is your intention? Do you really want to know the answer to this question now in your life? Is now the time for you to put this on your plate, so to speak? So in my description before, like if you're in a dark place and not moving, then this could just be a will check. And you just say, you know what, I don't want to just stay in this dark place. I'm getting out of here. And you can literally, in a sense, force yourself out of the black area to where something is happening again. For most people, through the veil is that you're just going to pop out and you'll be in lower world. You'll just break through the veil between middle world and lower world. And you'll pop out, and again, in generalities, for most people, that's a jungle, a wooded place, a place in nature they know, could be the water, whatever. Usually that place is populated by animals and wildlife, so to speak. So if animals then are approaching you or around you, then you can try and attract them. You may not see any animals at all in the first place. Again, then say it. Hey, where is everybody? I'm here to meet my power animals. Just say it out loud. Tell them, again, your intention is very important, so tell them what you need, what you want. If an animal is getting in your face and you're looking at you and you're having some kind of connection with an animal, then you need to ask right away, are you my power animal? Very important in all journeying. If a new character enters any journey, anytime, you need to say, are you my power animal? Are you my teacher? Not uncommon for people to run into relatives that are on the other side during journeying. You may run into a relative. You need to ask the question, why are you here? Why are you in my journey? A lot of relatives are just watching over you, and they're not there to be a teacher or anything else. They're there to be with you, to lend you assistance. So you need to just define that role for everybody that's in your journeys, because it might not be what you expect it to be. So if a power animal gets in your face and you say, are you my power animal? And they say, yes, I am, or they'll nod at you, then you can ask them your question. Should I go visit Aunt so-and-so over here next month? If you get an answer from your power animal, then you could ask that power animal, are there any other of my power animals here? Can you introduce me to them? Or you can go play, or you can do whatever you want to do. The idea, again, is to learn what this experience is like, to swim in the waters of journeying, to establish a relationship and some rapport with your power animal. A power animal may not get right in your face. Sometimes power animals kind of really ticked off at you because, you know, in my case, I was 42 years old, and I don't, you know, I have never visited them, so they're kind of like, you know, gee, Merry Christmas, what have you been doing, you know? But if an animal shows itself to you in 4 different ways, you see an animal 4 different times, it's promised, oh, certainly a power animal. You need to somehow attract it and get it to look you in the face and make that connection, are you my power animal? So again, the main concept of the journey is, 1, to carry your question with you into the altered state, to meet your power animals. They'll be able to go with you to lower world. They'll end up being everyday friends of yours, hopefully. Power animals are incredibly good friends to have with you in middle world all the time. That'll come in time. But ask the question, get an answer to it, have fun, meet other power animals, whatever you want to do. At the end of the journey, the drumming will stop for about a half a second, and then the drumming will take up in a whole nother different form of beat. And that beat's called a callback, and you've heard the callback. Your body knows the callback. You've heard it thousands of times before. You just don't remember that you've known it. So when the callback comes, you need to say, thank you very much, it was very nice meeting you, to your power animals, whatever. I need to go back now to middle worlds. I'll be back to see you again, and then you can lightly retrace your steps back to middle world, so that by time the callback drumming ends, you will have climbed back out of the knothole and will be standing looking at the tree in your backyard again. Okay, once that happens, then what I would suggest is that the drumming is going to stop completely, and if you want to, I feel it's a good idea to just at that point, while you're still there, just speak out a very simple synopsis of what the answer to your question was. The question was that my power animal thought that I should go visit my aunt next month. That's all you need to say. It helps when you go back and listen to the tape sometimes. They have that little synopsis about what you remember when you first get back from lower world. One thing I want to say about the callback, it's a very powerful part of journeying and about the discipline of journeying, in the sense that you need to honor this system, this arrow, because it's been around for a long time and it works. And one of the things that people will have in their experience of journeying is you are probably going to end up in some idyllic places that you never dreamed ever existed. And it may feel so good for you to be there in that place, and there's so much stress and anxiety in middle world that you will choose not to listen to the callback and not to come back to middle world, and you will just attempt to stay there. You will stay there, and you will probably most likely fall asleep. What happens in time then is there is not this performer that you go through and honor, and what will happen as soon as you start hearing the drums, you'll go to sleep, and you really won't be journeying anymore. You won't be taking a question. You won't be doing this. You'll just be having this real short thing. Yeah, it's a great form of sleep. I'm not saying that, but journeying is about taking a question, getting an answer. Yes, the tape in the machine lasts a certain amount of time, but you're going to be on some journeys that seem like they last 2 minutes, and you're going to be on other journeys that seem like they last 3 weeks. Because you're not in this time. You're not in this time element. You're in an altered place, in a place where time doesn't exist. So I'm asking you, and I'm suggesting strongly, that you really steel yourself to listen to the callback and honor and come back no matter what is happening in your journey at the time. Remember, if you keep doing this and you have this and you keep opening that window frequently enough, you're going to probably end up not having that window there at all anymore, and you'll be having this experience 24 hours a day. So it's more important that you learn by staying with that process to start off with. So let's talk about the next. What I would suggest is that you can take as many journeys as you want to the lower world to start off with. If you meet your power animals right away, you can do whatever you want to. You can go take some other journeys to lower world. But once you have met your power animals, then the next step would be to take a journey to upper world. So the journey to upper world is, in essence, the same way, except for you need to choose a place where you feel like you will be able to get from middle world to upper world. So some people, for instance, had a tree house that they used to like, so they go up in the tree house and then they jump off on a cloud. Or for me, since I've been up the mast on a boat 1,000 times, I just go up to the top of the mast, and it's easy for me to imagine to jump on a cloud from the mast. Some people go up a favorite mountain that they used to climb all the time, or a high place, or whatever else it may be. The idea, again, is take a simple question, unloaded. As soon as you start your journey to upper world, you can ask your power animals to join you. They'll be happy to join you. Tell them that you're on your way to upper world. This is your question, and your intention is to meet your teacher. So upper world, obviously, for most people, tends to be more etheric. Teachers tend to be humanoid in form, but not always. I have one good client whose teacher is a fig tree with gold and diamond jewelry hanging all over it. I have another person whose teacher is a pool of water. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a humanoid figure. Again, these are all generalities. It could be almost anything. Don't get stuck into the thing about journeying is always visual. For a lot of people it is visual, but for a lot of people it isn't visual. For a lot of people there's sound, for other people there's no sound. Your experience of journeying may happen totally in a transcendental way where there is no visual or oral information, that this information just comes to you in a stream form. Again, your internal dialogue might jump in and say, well, you're just making this all up because I'm not getting any other kind of information. Well, I think you can just say to your internal dialogue, we're just playing here. I'm going to listen to this stream, this story as it comes through me. I'm going to speak it out, and we'll make choices about it later. So, important that you don't get into that thing about, I have had people meet their teacher and go on a journey every week for the next 6 months and do nothing but fight with their teacher and say, no, you're not my teacher. I don't want you to be my teacher. I wanted this other kind of entity to be my teacher. Well, whatever. I mean, there are no accidents. They needed to go through that process. But when you break through the veil and you're in upper world, if something is holding your attention and you're kind of transfixed on it, whether it's a fig tree or pool of water, or it is something that very obviously represents a teacher to you, just ask the question, are you my teacher? If you get a positive response, and again, the response may not be audio, may just be a positive response there, ask your question. Trust me, in upper world, sometimes you can ask a question and you have to be really intent about listening, because you may get a whole chapter or a whole book of information in 30 seconds. Again, you don't need to speak it all out. You don't have to talk it all. Just say, man, I just got the whole enchilada. Boom. It'll come back to you as you go and listen to the tape. So the same things apply in upper world, other than there is usually a conversation going on. So in a way, to me, there's always one thing that's really kind of interesting in your life or going on, or something that you want to move into. After you've journeyed for a while and you're comfortable with the format and the internal dialogue's down to level, then you can start taking, tough questions, things you really want to start looking into in your life. So get the kernel of the question, repeat your question 3 times at the start, take it to your teacher. That question and that answer will almost automatically lead to another question. And with your teacher, you can go through that. You can go through that with your power animals too, but you might have a lot of dreams to interpret rather than having, some more concrete kind of information to deal with. So a lot of times a journey with your teacher may end up being more like 20 questions, because the answer to one question leads to another question, leads to another question. So that's about it. Again, especially with teachers and the etheric quality, a lot of times of upper world, you got to really honor the callback and come back to know the world. Do not, I would just say, try not to get into a judgment place about lower world or upper world. You'll probably find out in time that certain questions you actually had a better experience in lower world, and other questions you might have a better experience in upper world. You just have to learn that for yourself and what works for you. Or like some people do, you can just, when you're getting ready to go, you can jump off the balcony, and whether you go up or down, that's which way you go on that particular journey with that particular question, with that particular intention. So I think that's about it. I can't think of anything else right now. Obviously, you can always call me and I'm certain things will come up that you'll want to talk about, particulars and stuff like that. Main thing, again, have fun with this. Explore the possibility that all that you ever wanted to know is within you. And actually, I think what you'll find out in the long run is that this is a way for you to build a bridge where you'll get to the place where you'll finally understand that you know everything you're ever going to need to know. And then you have all the power and all the abilities that you've ever wanted. They're already all within you. It's just that they've been taken away from you through the good intentions of parents and teachers and things like that. So you can take it back in a discipleship this way, to walk in your own way, to have your own private conversations with yourself, and to integrate those into middle world. Because actually this is all about integrating all of it back into middle world. I think what you'll find out in the long run, if you stay with it, is you'll find out you don't need the information. You don't need knowledge, because what replaces that? Faith. If you have faith and trust that the flow is going to bring everything that it needs to bring, then it always does. And life gets a lot simpler. You have a lot more energy. The more resistance you take out of your body to let energy flow through, the less judgment, because judgment is resistance to energy, the less you need to do things that are conditional things to earn love from people, dress a certain way, walk a certain way, talk a certain way, pray a certain way, all those things that you've been taught to do to get respect and love. As you slowly give those up, you don't need the information. You don't need the rationalization. This journeying is a very powerful way to start walking over that bridge and find out when I'm trying to gift to you that there is on the other side of that bridge a total, complete, whole you, a beautiful, loving heart. You have to start with yourself. Have a great journey. Namaste.